Can this cheap $70 lens produce the same, if not better shots than this $800 lens? Let's find out. I'm talking about the Meike 35mm 1.7.
I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Micah.
Yeah, no, not in this office, it's not. We love Meike. The Meike 35mm 1.7 might be one of the best budget lenses for the micro four thirds of all time. It's literally 70 bucks on Amazon, which feels like highway robbery. It's small, it's compact, it's fully manual, and goes down to 1.7 aperture, so you can get that sexy, sexy bokeh.
Oh yeah.
This is way easier to do with a prime lens like this because there's not as many moving parts. So yes, this is a prime lens, which means that it has a fixed focal length of 35mm, so you can't zoom in or out, which means it's a perfect lens to test against our Panasonic Lumix 12-35 because we have both. The Panasonic retails for about $800, which is definitely not something every filmmaker can afford. We're shooting almost all of our videos on this tiny little Meike 35mm,
Mikey?
which is kind of frustrating because of how much money we've spent on other lenses. So what we did was we set up some test shots, both lenses set to 35mm at 2.8 aperture. We wanted to see if we could tell the difference when both lenses were set exactly the same. Needless to say, the sharpness on both of these lenses is pretty remarkable. So which one do you think is the Panasonic versus the Meike? Well, lens A is the Meike and lens B is the Panasonic. Now the Panasonic only goes down to f2.8, which is the equivalent of f5.6 on a full frame camera. So the depth of field is not as drastic. Now the Meike can go down to f1.7, which on a full frame is the equivalent of 3.4, which is a pretty drastic difference.
Nice work, Mikey. You the man.
All in all, these lenses are relatively different, but we wanted to compare them based on price and the ability to shoot at 35mm. Now let's dive into some of the pros and cons of each of these lenses. The 12-35 obviously zooms, so that's a point for the Panasonic. The Panasonic also has optical image stabilization, which the Meike does not. Since we're shooting with Panasonic GH5s, which have in-body image stabilization, it's not that big of a deal to us, but something you should be aware of. Lastly, the Panasonic does offer autofocus where the Meike doesn't. This is also not that big of a deal to us because most of what we shoot is in manual and the autofocus on this camera is not that great to begin with. But if you're doing more photography, this might be a deal breaker for you. Here's where the Meike wins. First off, the Meike doesn't have autofocus, which can actually be seen as a pro. And that's because it doesn't have focus by wire like the Panasonic does. Focus by wire is an electronic focus system, which can cause some inconsistencies as opposed to a manual focus system. The Meike's manual focus allows you to get buttery smooth rack focuses. The Meike also lets you shoot at a wider maximum aperture, giving you that sweet, sweet bokeh. It also has a declicked aperture ring, so you can adjust your aperture on the lens itself and not in the camera. Lastly, and most importantly, this lens is 70 bucks. The fact that this lens is so cheap and produces the shots that it does is absolutely remarkable. I would easily spend $300 on a lens that gets me this type of image quality. When all said and done, if you're on a budget, the Meike 35mm 1.7 might be the perfect lens for you. Meike also has a full line of lenses at different focal lengths for very reasonable prices as well. So if you want to get yourself a bunch of cheap prime lenses, Meike might be your best bet. So let us know in the comments if you thought there was a difference between the Meike and the Panasonic lens. If you got value out of this video, please leave us a like. And if you want more content just like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. See you guys next time.